I have highlighted some questions, starting at question 7. Actually, each question has questions within the question. So I have highlighted some that I think we can reasonably address today and get some meaning out of. In question 7, there's a question: why are 80% of people on death row convicted of crimes against whites, while 65% of homicide victims are black? Why is a death sentence more likely if a defendant is black and the victim is white? If we could today try as best we can to stay with reference to the text, that would be good. Although I know that's an impossible thing to ask this well-read group. Why do you think it's more likely that a death sentence will be imposed on black defendants than on white defendants? What do you think?
I can't answer that with staying in the text.
Okay, Jean, give us what you got.
Well, I mean, I may have talked about this with some of you before, but I've been reading Ibram Kendi's work, and one of his books is called Stamped from the Beginning, and the other one is How to Be an Anti-Racist. And one of the things that strikes me, and this goes into my background in learning and organizational change, is the degree to which a lot of these structures that we've built in our society and the way in which we operate is built on mental models, things that we think we hold very dearly, but we don't necessarily know why. And what strikes me about his work is the degree to which the colors, white and black, or the races over time, and Junia, you're probably reading this in your book Cast as well, have been put into a hierarchy and have been, talked about as, God, halos and angels are white and devil and bad things are black. That there is a something embedded in the way that we think and in our language around the world that imposes this light to dark, light as being good, dark as being bad. And then it imposes itself on these systems, and we don't necessarily know why. So that would be one part of what I get quite incredulous about. And then the second thing I think is poverty, and the degree to which poverty and lack of, figures into this crime, where the crimes occur and who the crimes occur against.
So this also answers question 16, which is, what are some books that you've read that help explain and untangle a little bit this racial history we have in the United States and how it impinges on the present? And Kendi is one of those authors that is often referenced. A couple of times we have sent out to our church members a rather long list of books and resources about this topic, most recently in June, following the George Floyd murder. And if you keep all your emails, that rather exhaustive bibliography is available. I could also send it out again. What do other folks think about this question? Why is it that black defendants are more likely to receive a death sentence than white defendants for an equivalent crime?
Seems from his book that one of the reasons could be that most of the juries are white and they're really not fairly chosen. They're not juries of peers, or at least that has been the case, especially in the South, according to what he says. And some of the prosecutors they just do their job. They don't go into the detail, or even the defense lawyers, as to what that person was, what happened, what really happened, and so forth. And so they make an accusatory plan, and suddenly they're just judged to be evil, bad, whatever, and they're sent to jail. And then they're given the death penalty.
I think Bryan really points out the same thing about juries. They're white and they're prejudiced.
Mhm.
There's also the issue of inadequate representation, which he points out several times in his book. It's one thing to have a private defense attorney versus a public defender. And a lot of Americans, white and black, but certainly at the lower end of the economic scale, cannot afford a private attorney in any case, civil or criminal matter, misdemeanor or felony. It's just way out of reach.
And wouldn't another thing be that they can't pay the bond? And so we've talked about the bond, the organizations that are paying bonds and so forth, so that suddenly they go to jail. They can't get out. They can't do the things they normally do. They can't be with their families. They really can't defend themselves.
And that heightens the chance that you're going to take a plea deal
Yes.
because you want to get out as soon as possible. If you are already out, you may choose to do a trial. And of course, trial is riskier in terms of a longer sentence. But if you really think you're innocent and you really think your attorney can prove, that you're not guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, then you want to be out of jail during that process. Because if you're in jail all the way until the court date, that can be months, a year. And so if the state's attorney comes along and says, well, if you plead now, you'll get out sooner, I think you might take that plea. What do others think about this question about the
I
racial?
want to add, not from book, but a personal note that flips this all for you. Many of you know that 3 years ago, I was involved in 2 very serious automobile accidents that have left me in ways physically compromised. My court date 3 years later was to have been on Monday. Because of much of the unrest of what's going on, my lawyer about a month ago or so and I had some conversations, and his feeling was that as a white woman from Winnetka, I should not go to court because I could, in fact, lose everything that 2 insurance companies were offering to help repair my house and make changes and make things more available. So it's a flip that in Cook County, the chances are that I would get a primarily black jury, and that they would indeed give me no compensation for my injuries or my car. So it doesn't relate to where the author was going to in the book, but in real life, it plays out in reverse as well.
Did your attorney in the current political environment, like that you'd be even more likely to have a worse outcome?
Absolutely. Since the court date was Monday, and within the past 2 months, we hadn't had this conversation in almost 3 years, but within the past 3 months, the legal counsel that I had advised that I take what was being offered, not go to court, because the chances are, as somebody just said, I would lose everything, being a supposedly wealthy white woman from Winnetka.
Is that a fact, though? I mean, was that prejudice on the part of the lawyers, or
Yes.
was it a fact that would happen?
I wouldn't have thought about it. It's their experience, and they were sufficient enough in their arguments that we agreed. 2 insurance companies and the possibility of going to court.
Did you hear anything since then Monday?
Say it again.
That happened Monday. Have you heard anything since?
We haven't heard anything. I've signed 2 pieces of paper that's for both insurance companies saying we've agreed to the settlement.
And this is going back to the South again, but since I travel through Mississippi and Arkansas several times a year, where you have institutions of learning or a higher income level for everybody in the town, in the area, I don't see as much prejudice. But in areas where a lower income blacks and whites are living together, there's still, are in very poor towns, there's still this prevalent thought that from the white side, from white people towards the blacks, that the black people really don't matter. They have low intelligence. They're not worth very much. They don't have any respect for them. I was in South Haven, Mississippi. Well, I've been usually there several times a year. I have one of my husband's relatives who's lives in a very modest neighborhood. It's a big subdivision which has turned from, it was a white flight subdivision which turned black. And actually, South Haven is the area where John Gresham, who often writes, all of the stories are set really in the South, but she has a big white sign with black and red lettering. We call the police in case of violence and crime. And across the street from her are black folks. And when they started moving into the area, they were desperately afraid. I think they've become more accustomed to it, but that sign still remains there because there is a lot of fear if they're living near black people and they're older. So this is just one of my, I just think that that feeling is still very prevalent. And also, well, this is more contemporary, but I speak to all the people who work for me, and they are really concerned about law and order. I had a locksmith who also rides a motorcycle with groups, and he was just here yesterday, and he said he believes in America. And my postman, who really has Jewish grandparents, he's fallen away from the Jewish faith, and he's going along with his children. And it's amazing to me how people are so concerned about law and order at the expense of everything else, at the expense of democracy, at the expense of the sensitivity towards what other people of especially of color are experiencing.
Some people
So
say law and order language is code language for what?
For racism.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
And that's been walked out, historically, the number of times that law and order is used as a political ploy to win elections, it happens over and over. Nixon used it, Reagan used it in the war on drugs. I mean, it comes up again and again.
yeah, the first President Bush, we remember his famous Willie Horton advertisement commercial.
Yeah, I mean, both sides of the aisle do it. The Democrats, did it when, Clinton labeled people welfare queens and talked about, people who were sponging off the government. I mean, it happens, it's used in order to spin and to sway public opinion to support what is needed to be done.
So nobody says black, but that's the picture that goes through people's minds who are predisposed to associate race with those phrases.
Yeah, I was at my acupuncturist earlier today who's up in Highland Park, and there's going to be a Trump rally in Highland Park coming up. And there's a lot of discussion amongst the community as to whether you respond or not, because, it's in psychological terms, are we experiencing an extinction burst? So that we're trying to, there's so many people who are pushing to Black Lives Matter and for the country to look at racism, that people are really, pushing hard to put it right out there, like a 2-year-old who's having a tantrum. But, or do you go out and protest and say, we as a community don't support that, and see violence happen?
I'd like to move us along in our questions since this is our last day to talk about the book. And the question 8 raised questions about obstacles and barriers that formerly incarcerated people face when they're released. The question is exactly, what challenges do you think formerly incarcerated people face when they re-enter the community?
They can't get a job.
And why is that? Why is employment more difficult for formerly incarcerated people?
Because people think they can be trusted.
Insurance, many of the insurance companies won't bond employers if they hire anyone who's been convicted of a felony.
And one of the questions on the application is, have you ever been convicted of a felony?
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think I may have said this in this group or another group. In my former church, I was involved in an effort to help ban the box. And I think that was eventually passed and signed by Governor Quinn. The idea that it is, I think it's law in Illinois. I have to do some research to check this. I think we succeeded in banning that question from the initial.
I believe you're right, yeah.
Yeah. And so an employer cannot ask on a form about history of arrest and incarceration, but on a follow-up interview, face-to-face, of course, an employer can ask that question. The idea is there are many people who at least deserve a face-to-face interview with an employer and can disclose the information about previous arrests and incarcerations in the face-to-face interview, which today would probably be a Zoom interview. And that way they'd at least have the opportunity to present themselves, body, soul, voice, eye contact with the employer, so the employer could hear firsthand about the circumstances of the arrest or the incarceration. And some of these forms may even ask about arrest rather than conviction. And of course, a lot of people can be arrested in all kinds of circumstances that do not lead to a conviction or an incarceration or parole or probation. So I think that was passed in Illinois. Also, we did succeed at the church I served in Arlington Heights in getting a bill through the state legislature that was signed by Governor Quinn that allowed for the sealing of certain low-level felony convictions. And a sealing of a conviction means that it's only visible to the courts and to the police. It's not visible to the general public. And that allows someone who's been incarcerated to more likely get employment, get housing, get education benefits, government benefits, and so on. It doesn't expunge the conviction, but it seals it from public view. So,
would they be convicted of perjury if they said that they hadn't been convicted, if they were asked and said they hadn't been convicted?
that's a good question. I don't know. I don't think perjury is in a legal setting where you're actually, you're giving sworn testimony. So I don't think that would include interview with a potential employer. I don't know. That's a good question, Jane. I don't know how that works. Nancy, you have a comment?
Another obstacle that those who have been released from prison used to face is the relationship with those closest to them, particularly spouses. We saw that Walter's wife chose to go on without him. I would not be surprised but that can happen in other situations as well.
What are some other obstacles to integration of in society of formerly incarcerated people?
How about lack of training
Yeah.
inside the prison, job training or how to read or how to get along with other people, all kinds of things that could be helpful to people when they get out. And if when they get out, it's assumed that they have met their obligation to society, why are we even questioning them?
Yeah, Jenny Volkatz made it pretty clear to us when she was with us that Illinois and other states too probably don't do a very good job actually rehabilitating inmates. They keep them behind the walls, but beyond that, the job education or just general education is pretty spotty. I think she said it's kind of dependent on that particular prison, right? Didn't she say that? Some of you know that Vince and I have a grandson who's incarcerated, who's in a state prison in Michigan. And he's going to be 21 this month. He never completed his high school diploma. So he's been working on his GED, which is now a 4-step process. You take 4 different tests, and you can take them at different times. Well, he's completed 2 of those, but because of COVID, the testing and the instruction for the GED has stopped. So he's frozen right now in being able to teach his GED.
And there's nothing available to him online?
No, I think that's all frozen. I don't know the details, but I don't think he can go online either, just like on his own. Yeah, there are lots of barriers and obstacles with education and training.
Well, and the world with technology moves so quickly that the job skills are changing so rapidly. It would be hard to jump back in when you've gotten off that train.
Especially if they've been in jail for a while, for a long period.
And you lose your social networks too, that are very important in getting a job.
Also, I'm not sure that a convicted felon, once they're out of prison, is allowed in all states to vote in elections.
Right.
I think there's a great variety of, the laws are different in all the states.
We just saw a movie, Slay the Dragon, that was about Florida, I think. Or we saw something about Florida that I know it was an article in the New Yorker that said that Florida has now, they had a statute that said that felons couldn't vote for life. And that has been turned around, but now they have a statute that says if you have any past deaths, you can't vote. And that's knocking out a lot of people. So,
any past debts?
I think the legislation says the terms of the sentence must be fulfilled.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right.
So if you're still on parole or probation, the terms of your sentence may not be fulfilled. And if you owe a $500 fine or restitution for your crime that has not been paid, maybe even with interest, then you are also not cleared to vote.
That's exactly the verbiage for it, Jeffrey.
Yeah, there's an organization that raises money to try to pay those off, these folks.
Great idea.
I'd like to move on. Question 10 talks about how certain conditions in prisons actually seem to impose additional punishment beyond prison itself, which I think raises a good question. The end question in number 10 is, what kind of punishment, if any, should exist in prisons? Should there ever be in prison any kind of additional form of punishment beyond the loss of freedom itself?
I would assume that, can you hear me?
Yes.
I would assume that the punishment for infractions in prison would be appropriate, but not additional punishment for what you were sentenced to.
But in Walter's case, he was immediately put on death row, And I believe that there was no window in his cell. It was an extremely tiny cell. So he was in the dark it was in the dark most of the time, and he was only let out for an hour a day. And so that in itself is major punishment.
Yeah, in my grandson's case, his unit, he lives in a pod of 8 inmates in this prison in Adrian, Michigan. There's no air conditioning.
Oh,
And it gets unbearably hot in June and July, and maybe this month too. It's just been dreadfully hot. And so Vince and I just advise him to, drink as much water as he can. And he tries to sleep during the day and be awake at night to make it a little more possible for him. But he wrote in one of his letters to us that he just feels it's inhumane.
It is, yeah.
That there's no air conditioning in a prison today.
And you can imagine how much worse it is in Mississippi, in Alabama.
Yeah, right. It'd be even worse down there. Yeah.
No wonder they survive.
Our grandson was also exposed to COVID and was tested positive for COVID. And it's a challenge. Imagine it's a challenge for prisons with 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people trying to keep everybody safe from COVID. It's almost impossible, right? And yet you don't go to prison to also get a possible life-threatening illness. So what do? What's reasonable? What is humane? Let them out?
a lot of people were let out, weren't they?
Maybe in some jurisdictions, but not in Michigan. I don't think in Illinois. Cook County, I think, has, but Cook County is separate from the Illinois prison system, of course.
I think we were at minimum security prisons with, white collar criminals.
So what did they do?
Well, Mark was sick and for just like a few days. And so he was tested, and that's when he was determined to be positive. He got over his illness pretty quickly, but he was segregated with other COVID positive inmates until he had 2 negative tests in a row. But it was about half of the inmates. In this particular prison, it was 40-50% of the inmates who got COVID.
Wow.
So, and a number died, and a number of
Hello?
died.
Mute yourself,
Yes.
Mel.
Yeah, I just muted him. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, what I don't understand is why has this hatred lasted for so long? I mean, there have been churches around forever and ever and ever, and the hatred seems to be just as awful in certain quarters as it was during slavery.
Mm-hmm.
It just never stops.
But that's mostly from the South and the history, and after the Reconstruction, when the white populace began to realize that here they had 2 black senators from Mississippi who had been appointed by the legislature, and about 30 representatives. And by that time, the whites were on their feet. They were afraid. Those 3 words that Bryan Stevenson mentioned at the beginning: fear, anger, and distance. If we are afraid, if we are angry at somebody, we're angry at ourselves, but it's the distance, not relating to somebody else. And
We never see
that's
somebody other than ourselves. It's rare.
even in the small Mississippi towns, there's the white and black, the ones where there is no education or money much. There was in my husband's town where desegregation came very quickly because the owners of the the factories were from New York, and many of them were Jewish, and they demanded desegregation during the early 60s. But I know there was one man, and he was a multimillionaire. He owned a lot of land. And his comment to me, and he was instrumental in bringing the Toyota plant to their county. But his comment to me about the black people in Mississippi. He said, well, in all these southern towns, and they sound south, they were in the north. And he said, these people come out, you know, to the general store once a month for their check, their aid check, and then they disappear again for another month. And he said they're all fat and lazy. And I was really taken aback. But, you know, and this was just 2 years ago that he said this to me. So, you know, these prevalent prejudices and hatreds are still there.
I'm wondering if any of you think that technology plays a role maybe in changing our minds a little bit. I'm thinking about how when the Vietnam War came into our living rooms through the TV, and people were looking at the streets of Saigon during the Tet Offensive in March or April of 1968, and they saw, this is crazy, what are we doing there? And suddenly minds seemed to shift. I mean, that's the conventional narrative of the role that television played in the end of the Vietnam War and American support for the Vietnam War. I'm wondering if the same thing isn't happening with these images of police brutality against African Americans.
That could play a role because in Africa, people know of Africa about what they see on TV, and that's what they base their judgment on. You know, but then when you go into Africa, you will see a whole new section where life isn't as bad as it is. We know there are some places that are terrible, but you see that here, even in America. So when you are shown the worst parts, you know, your judgment is based on that, and you tend to form opinions based on what you've seen because you've not researched, you know. So that could be that, too, like you're saying.
Yeah, it's, you know, a picture.
I wonder if that's a double-edged thing, though, because at the same time that many people are seeing it and saying this abuse can't go on, the other side of the coin is playing up, you know, this violence, people perpetuating violence and showing the worst of that rather than the majority of silent, you know, well-behaved protesters.
So each side has its own narrative and each side has its own picture.
They do.
Its own video, yeah. I think.
Well, on the other side, I've noticed that there are a lot more broadcasters who are black. Who they sort of show up. They're on the show. They're the assistant. They're the other anchor, and they have more models, and they have more black women on TV in ads and shows and hostesses and game shows, and it just seems to me that since all of this started with the killings, the networks are making an effort to have more black people on, which is good. Mm-hmm. But I don't know what it means, if it means zip.
I think there's some polling that indicated that after the George Floyd video came out, that the phrase Black Lives Matter and what it is associated with in people's minds actually grew in popularity. Popularity, is that the right word? A favorable response among whites.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But that recently, that number has gone down again, I heard. And yet I think there are white folks throughout America who were whose opinions and views were probably permanently altered because of that image of the white police officer murdering George Floyd, and his smug attitude, and the fact that his colleagues were just watching, which suggests systemic failure. So I'm hopeful personally that we may have some permanent shifting of views in America since June, and that those who died at the hands of police officers did not die in vain.
our last speaker, what I really appreciated about him, among many things, was how he's tackling such a complex problem in that community in a holistic way. It's a microcosm for maybe something that could be done more broadly, because these are very complex issues and don't have easy solutions.
Yeah, he said that each client who walks through the door is assigned a lawyer, a social worker, and something else. What was it? Do you remember? Anybody?
A community, I have notes in there.
Yeah, he did emphasize a wraparound services approach for each client, and that those three professionals and the client, making 4 people, form a confidential client attorney privilege circle. So whatever is shared in that circle stays in that circle, but the social worker can share with the attorney, can share with the client, and all around the circle. I was also, Gene, very encouraged by that model, that it's not enough to give a young Black defendant a lawyer.
Right.
The legal part's only part of the situation, right?
Well, you think about what happens to a young white male or female between 18 and 24 who gets in trouble. There's a whole, particularly if there is funding to do so, there's a whole, it takes a village thing that happens to help get that person on, back on track, or back within the milepost or the road, back on the right road.
Can we move on? The next question at 11 is about mental illness in prisons. Sorry, not in prison, but at trial. The question is, why is severe mental illness often ignored at trial? Do you remember some examples from the book by chance, or other examples?
I think most people just don't understand how mental illness manifests itself to a large degree. And so when somebody in a witness stand is saying strange things, they just think, well, that's that type, that's their personality, and that's the type of person they are. They don't know very much about mental illness.
I wonder if the statutes allow for presentation of evidence of mental illness at trial. Every state's different, every law is different.
Mm-hmm.
It may simply be irrelevant from a legal perspective.
I think in the book it serves the prosecutor well to ignore the illness of the man who falsely testified. He needed to find a prosecution to keep his support in the community, and he used a person with mental illness to testify, right?
Yeah, that was an example, yeah. There are several examples in the book also of where inadequate representation meant that the defense attorney may not have even known that his or her client had mental illness. So there was no assessment, there was no knowledge, so there was no presentation of that evidence. Mel, you are muted. Let me unmute you.
Oh,
Go ahead.
the attorneys and the judges and members of juries and so on aren't trained to deal with mental illness either. It's an education issue, I believe.
Well, that boy who killed all the children in Newton, there was lots of evidence that he was mentally ill, and because he was from a affluent home, nobody pushed on the fact that something should be done about him.
You mean before the shooting?
Before the killing.
Well, having navigated that it's really quite difficult to, because of the way our laws have changed,
Uh-huh.
to make someone get help. And
Well, not make them get help, but at least find out what was going on in that home informally. I mean, the mother let him buy guns, and people knew that.
True.
I think in Illinois, as I recall, there is a provision for someone who's convicted of capital murder who has mental illness. And I think a jury can judge someone guilty but mentally ill. But I don't think there's any difference in the sentence, except a sentence that includes treatment for the mental illness. Now, I'm going on a very rough memory of this. You could do your own research, but I don't think it's allowed to be used as mitigation for a lower sentence. But it is taken into account for what happens in the sentence and the availability of mental health treatment during the sentence.
Don't they sometimes say that somebody cannot stand trial because of his mental condition?
Yeah, that's competence. Competence is being able to understand the charges and understand the procedures, the legal procedures of the trial. And how that overlaps exactly with mental illness, I'm not certain. A person with dementia, which is not usually considered a mental illness, could be judged incompetent to actually go through the legal procedures. Here I'm talking like a lawyer, and all I ever did is apply for law school.
You're doing a good job of it.
I'm so glad you decided to do this instead.
Yeah, another calling.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like in the League of Women Voters, we pay everyone that comes to speak to us because we feel they've taken the time and the effort, especially those who are coming from institutions where they are doing legal work for people who are indigent. And I was just wondering, is it possible that we can take up a collection to send to the John Howard Society or to the Mike Neela Society? I mean, even if all of us contributed a little bit, I think it's an action that we could take, because I thought their information was very valuable, and I enjoyed listening to Jenny, was it Boland Katz. I'm so grateful that there's so many people in the United States that we never hear about that are doing wonderful things for humanity. And I just thought, that might be something we want to do on our own as a group.
Yeah, people can always contribute on their own. We did make a gift on behalf of WCC Spiritual Enrichment Ministry to John Howard Association and the Lawndale Christian Legal Clinic Center.
Good.
$250 gift in gratitude for their executive directors being with us.
I'm glad to hear that. That's very important.
You can thank Mel and Paul. They're the co-chairs of spiritual enrichment, and we got a bigger budget this year. Thanks to their advocacy. The next question, 12, is about family members of people convicted of crimes. McMillan's mother tells Stevenson, "I feel like I've been convicted too. How do you think family members of people convicted of crimes should be treated?"
With compassion. You think about how that hurts on so many different levels.
Yeah, and how much time do they have to visit? How often can they visit? And how far away are they incarcerated from family? Those are all important questions, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, why wouldn't you treat any individual, any person, not always with kindness and respect? I think that's a given. And if it's anything less than that, it's not morally right.
My church in Arlington Heights worked on a number of bills around criminal justice reform, and one of them was called Children of the Incarcerated. And I cannot remember all the aspects of that bill, or even if the bill was passed. And it wasn't just a bill, but it was also some internal reforms within the Illinois Department of Corrections that we requested. But it was all geared toward the welfare of the children, because if children are separated from their mothers and fathers, it does a lot of damage to those children psychologically. And the Department of Corrections, of course, has a need for order and safety in the prisons, but sometimes they privilege that over the need of minor children to actually spend quality time, physical time also, being held, sitting on laps, hugging, back in the days when we could do that, with their mothers and fathers in prison. And in some cases, that was not being allowed in the Illinois Department of Corrections.
My church in Northbrook also worked in that area, as with Jeffrey's church. And I do remember that there were some steps forward, which probably seems simple. One was just having a designated visiting area with some toys and some soft animals and things so that it was welcoming to the children. The other was trying to get a way to alert families who were now figuring out how to use public transportation to get to places like Dwight and what have you, only to spend 4 or 5 hours doing this with young children, only to find that there'd been a lockdown for some reason and no notification of that to the families to do that. So those what seemed to be simple things were just made all the difference to families trying to be involved, and particularly to the children who were looking forward to seeing a parent or relative and then being deprived of that, sometimes at the gate as they got there.
Yeah, I forgot, Jan, that St. Peter's was involved with St. John with the Community Renewal Society in that effort.
Right.
Yeah.
There are some states, though, like California, that allow conjugal visits. So I think there's such a variance among the rules and laws of the states. And I mean, it's such a major, we have so many major problems. It's just another one to look at, but I'm so glad there are people that are working on this. And I think it's important that we are far more aware of this situation than before we begin this book study.
I think maybe phone calls were another point of contention in this legislation we were trying to get through. Phone calls are very expensive from inmates to their loved ones. And this is outsourced. In Michigan, it's outsourced. I bet it's outsourced in Illinois too, to companies who make a profit from the phone calls. So this is no ordinary long distance phone call. There's a premium on top of the landline long distance that you would pay. We pay quite a bit to talk to our grandson almost every day. But emails, you can actually do emails with our grandson in Michigan, and it's very affordable. I think it's only 50 cents per email. And for another 50 cents, you can send a picture too. Not just any picture, it's got to be approved.
Is he able to get online, therefore, to get emails? Or how does that work?
Yeah, there's some limited facility, but I know he can't just get online like you and I can get online. I think it's pretty restricted. There is a way for him to type a message to me, yes. But beyond that, I don't know the details.
And then you pay for it?
I pay for it. So when I send him a letter, I include an extra stamp. It's called a stamp. It's not really a stamp. I include an extra stamp for him to send a letter back to me. And these aren't letters, these are emails.
Emails.
Yeah.
Mm.
And that's affordable, but not as nice as a phone call.
Does the prison listen in, or do they read the emails before they're forwarded to your grandson?
Yeah, and they say that these will be read. I assume that they're listening in. We just assume they are.
Jeffrey, one of the things that I was really impressed with our speaker last week was that he said he felt there was a lot of hope for the criminal justice system in Cook County and Illinois, but not for police reform. And it sounds, I mean, he was really sort of adamant about not being very hopeful about police reform. And I would guess that would also hold for guards in prisons. But after this discussion, one would think they really needed to be reformed.
Yeah, Jenny Volenkat spoke a little bit about that, didn't she? Nancy, you have a comment?
One of the most touching aspects of the book for me was, remember that Bryan was visiting a prison where the person he was representing just wanted that milkshake, that chocolate milkshake. But before he went to see him one day, he noticed that there was a different truck there. And it was the truck of a guy with all those redneck stickers. And, but that guard, when he came to the trial of Bryan's defendant, the milkshake, the guy who wanted the milkshake, recognized in himself the kinds of child neglect problems that Bryan's defendant had experienced. And the guard had a transforming moment of realizing that his attitudes, his negative attitudes, had been very similar, had been formed by similar circumstances to the defendants. And so on the way home, he bought the defendant a milkshake. I just thought that was such an amazing transformation that it's worth just a little bit of thought. How does transformation happen? In response to your talking about the guards, Junior.
Was that in the book and the movie, or?
In the book.
I think it was in the book, but not the movie, as I recall.
But when you think
Minding
how
us.
many similar situations Bryan Stevenson lived through and working with prison guards, that, there was just this one that he mentioned, and everybody's looking for breakthroughs and transformation, which is so important in life. I think that the need to respect and be kind to every human being is paramount. And it's something that we have to persist at all the time. I thought it was a very sweet vignette, but when you think of all the other encounters he had, that one stood out in his mind, but it's probably more on the rare side than on the common side, unfortunately.
There were two more questions I'd like to get to, if we can, and then do a little wrap up. Question 18 talked about Stevenson's self-care, what he did for himself to stay in the fight, just in general. Because nonprofit work is always exhausting. But this kind of nonprofit work, this has got to be the most wearing down of them all. What did Stevenson do to take care of his body, spirit, and mind so that he could remain effective?
He ran.
Yeah.
He took vacations on the Gulf of Alabama with his the cohorts in his office. And once in a while, I think they partied also. They would have a fun time together in in Montgomery at the office.
I thought that it was also a bit of self-care, the way he connected to the families, excuse me, of the people who he was helping. So he was interested in knowing them as human beings rather than just a case.
Very true. And he got an emotional lift, even though I read that one time it was late at night and they wanted to visit some relatives very deep into the country. And it was so late, but he was surprised when he got there, and I think it was a trailer town, and there were 30 people crowded into this trailer waiting to meet him. And this one lady kept plying him with iced tea. And you can't, that was overwhelmingly kind and touching, I thought. And I think every experience he had, especially with those who came to support Walter in the courtrooms, and when they weren't allowed to come in, they filled the courtroom first with white people, and then he talked to the judge and other people to make sure that the black family of Walter would be able to come in. I think the support of people you're trying to help and their response was so important to his emotional well-being. Especially that lady who said, "I'm here." Remember, she was deathly afraid of the dark. And she said, "I'm here," and she wouldn't sit down. I thought that was such a sweet moment. And she came to him later on, I think several weeks of the trial, and he formed a wonderful bond with these people.
Our son was working with a union group in the South and trying to improve their conditions. And one Sunday afternoon, some of the union members came over with a great big red velvet cake for them, and that was an enormous good thing for those men to have happen to them. They were appreciated.
I'm mentioning this question not only because it's on the study guide, but because a couple months ago, you might remember Jeff Braun preached a sermon about the need for our church to become more active in advocating for social change, not just volunteering and giving money to good causes, but actually getting in the fight, as it were. Those are my words, not Jeff's. And my own experience with social justice work is it is exhausting, because the moment you start pushing for something, there will definitely be people pushing back.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not pleasant. It requires you to dig deep into your own spiritual, emotionally relational wells and take care of yourself so that you've got strength to continue in the struggle. They don't call it a struggle for nothing. It's a struggle. And it's worth considering how we take care of ourselves when we really throw ourselves into something that has some controversy.
What are we going to do to get into action?
Yeah, it's kind of inevitable, but sometimes we don't count the cost. As Jesus said, if you're going to follow me, count the cost before you leap into the abyss. Last question is the last question on the study guide. What new questions did this book raise about capital punishment for you? Maybe more broadly, what questions did this book raise that are new for you about the whole criminal justice system?
Well, so much of it has been, incarcerating people for minor offenses for many years and wrongfully incarcerating them in death row. I feel that death penalty should be abolished in all the states. And I do think we certainly need to educate these prisoners if we have them there. I do know under Toni Preckwinkle, when she first took office, I think it was about 7-8 years ago, there were 10,000 people incarcerated in the county jail. And now I know that's down to about, I know it's less than 6,000. And since the legalization of marijuana, I think throughout the United States, they've let, and I hope they've let many of these people who were incarcerated for small offenses go. But, you know, it needs tremendous oversight by the populace, and the general populace is not interested, I don't think, because if they don't have someone there in jail, you know, it's somebody else's problem, not theirs.
Yeah. And I'm wondering who is the watchdog on our county prisons, since John Howard Society focuses on prisons.
Well, I'm glad we don't have any private prisons. I was glad to hear that
Yeah.
news.
I'd like to turn to just an assessment from you all about how we did on our objectives for these 5 weeks in WCC Reads. I'm sure you'll recall our objectives. Actually, I don't recall them. I have to read them. Explore the personal, intellectual, spiritual, and social themes in the book. How'd we do? Thumbs up, thumbs down? Side. Examine how these themes inform our own views of the criminal justice system and its impact on people of color. Consider how these themes speak to our spiritual lives and our lives as citizens, especially in the era of Black Lives Matter.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
How did we do?
Mm-hmm.
And lastly, build community among those who attend.
Well, we certainly have done that.
Oh, yes. Oh, we need to do that, right?
Yeah, I think that's important anytime church people gather for anything.
It just amazes me how that one simple line, the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, sheds so much light on everything. And I think when we take that into consideration, and if everybody just lived by that one simple rule, it would make such a difference.
And it's basically in every religion too.
There's also the platinum rule, do unto others as they would like to have done unto them, which is a little bit different. It's really doing an assessment based on the needs, the identified needs of the other person, rather than using your own sense of what they need. I'm not putting Jesus down. No, don't put that in the messenger. I'm just saying there might be a higher moral standard than the.
I think we should report that right away.
No, I don't care.
Taught him that. Bryan Stevenson's mother taught him that. And the other vignette that I'll remember for a long time was the day that he, misunderstanding the boy who was stuttering, thinking the boy who was stuttering was clowning around, he laughed. And his mother recognized that that wasn't what she wanted to happen to the boy who was stuttering. And so she made Bryan not only apologize, but hug the boy and say, I love you. And how formational that was to have a mother with that perception, that love, that care, and that, my gosh, you're gonna learn these things, whether you want to or not.
Thank you for reminding us of that vignette. That was powerful. Can those who are willing give us a 1 or 2 word, no more than a sentence, takeaway for you from this book? 5, 10 years from now, what will you remember as a takeaway from this book? Go ahead.
Well, go ahead.
The appalling numbers, the unbelievable figures about how many people are in prison and how many people are condemned to death and how many innocent people are condemned to death.
Thank you, Madge. Somebody else? What's a takeaway? General takeaway.
I think that Go ahead.
There is a lot of pain in the world that's unacknowledged.
Thank you.
I
Eleanor?
think that our prison system, such as it is depresses kindness and the growth of our society, because we do not re-educate these men. We don't educate these men and give them job skills. And it makes them, when they come out, they are more disheartened and more unhappy than when they went in. It's a very negative situation.
Thank you. Somebody else with a
The
takeaway?
subjectivity of our justice system.
Mine is that you can make change, even though it looks almost impossible to do.
And we do need to make change.
Yes.
Anybody else want to offer a 2 or 3 word takeaway?
Oh, often I need to be reminded. I met Bryan Stevenson at Chautauqua probably 5 years ago, or right after the book was published. Read the book, and now having read it again, continue to say, I forgot, and I need to be reminded.
Mel, do you have a takeaway from this study or discussion?
Well, I'm not sure it evolved from the book, but it strikes me that the cost of prisons, not just the financial cost, but the moral cost of prisons, is very high to us, and that we would be, we need to focus on what it's doing to everybody.
Andrew, did you have a summary impression from the book?
Overall, my thing is about the people on here, their perception of the whole issue, and giving me the assurance that there is hope, and it's not everybody, it's like that. My takeaway is that I keep on praying and hoping that things are gonna change with the level that we are doing as a group here.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Nancy?
I think that our association with Bethel Baptist might help us to find some ways to address both imprisonment and what happens ahead of time that means that people end up in prison.
Okay, did I miss anybody? There is another summary question, but we're out of time. How has this book changed your life? I think a lot of your responses just now have indicated some ways that you've been changed spiritually, mentally, and maybe even how we move and live in the world.